Hi everybody, Kerwin Rae here and welcome back to the next instalment of the Maven series. And I have a very special guest today, John Dwyer, also known as JD, also known as the Seinfeld guy. John Dwyer was actually famous for bringing out Jerry Seinfeld out of retirement and over to Australia to actually feature and star in the Greater Building Society advertising campaign that was a huge success a number of years ago here in Australia. John has also worked with such companies such as McDonald's, KFC, Caltex, News Limited, Channel 9, Westfield's billion-dollar operation, just to name a few. He's also, I should point out, just released the How to Wow client attraction system, which is literally, as John tells me, fresh off the publisher, off the publishing press, and it's only just been released today, which is available in all good bookstores. And it's with that, I have great pleasure to welcome JD to the studios, mate. Good to see you.
Thank you, Kerwin. Yeah, very pleased to be here, and thank you for that big rap. I hope I live up to half of that in this interview.
I was going to say, when I saw your bio get sent over, I didn't expect you to walk in. I expected you to almost float in like a messiah.
The power of good copywriting.
That's it. Never ask a good copywriter to write their own bio. It always ends up being something spectacular. Well, listen, mate, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
And I'll have to say, look, this is a real pleasure for me because I consider myself someone who's a thorough, someone who's really into their marketing. And when I saw your biography and when I saw what you've done, I was actually, two things. Number one, I was incredibly impressed by what you've done. But number two, I was really shocked that I actually hadn't heard of you before. You're someone who's flown under the radar for quite a while here in Australia.
Wow.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how is it now that we're finding out about you?
Look, Kerwin, I have to tell you, the reason I've flown under the radar is, as you will see throughout this interview, I'm very shy.
Can we just focus all the cameras on John right now?
If you could just move that camera. Yeah, mate, look, I come from a marketing background and mainly a corporate marketing background up until perhaps 10 or so years ago. So therefore those names that you're reading out, the News Limiteds and the McDonald's and KFCs, I sort of have been involved in that world, and in the last dozen years I've certainly learned that there are a lot of small businesses that are looking for marketing savvy, so that's why I've moved across. Still look after some big businesses, but I've moved across to help small businesses.
Right.
But you asked how I kicked off very quickly. When I left school, did the advertising and marketing degree at uni, and throughout that period of time had some part-time jobs with organisations such as 2SM, the big radio station here in Sydney, where I was lucky enough to be part of their Rocktober festival. And if anyone is...
Rocktober, I can see that coming back in a big way. Is anyone using that at the moment?
Look, we might just trademark that.
Put that down.
But yeah, look, they were the radio station in Sydney, 2SM, and anybody in my vintage in their 50s would remember that 2SM was the radio station, and they had this big celebration every October, which they called Rocktober, and it was my job to put on their concerts, and so it was great fun because it was not unusual to be having Dragon or even AC/DC or Jimmy Barnes or God forbid Mark Holden.
Wow. I hope you've got some good photos. I bet your kids will love seeing them.
My teenagers just shake their head and they go, you put Mark Holden on, because they see him just as the Australian Idol judge, but they don't know he was a big pop star at the time. And I moved on from there, worked for Grace Brothers at a big shopping centre here in Sydney called Roselands, which was the...
And that was in their advertising and marketing department?
In the marketing department, yep. So, mind you, at the age of whatever I was, 20 or 21, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I was lucky enough to score the job in their marketing department, and Grace Brothers are pretty good trainers, so I got to learn how the whole retail sphere worked from a marketing point of view. And then after a few years there, moved across to the Woolworths empire and was involved there for a long while, and was very, very lucky to be there throughout the time that Woolworths did a lot of, I guess you'd call them value-add marketing concepts. So it would be that for every $10 you spent, you had a stamp, and you would save the stamp on a saver sheet.
Yeah.
Very much like Tesco out of the UK. And then you would get cookware and glassware for crazy, ridiculously cheap prices. And I cottoned onto this and thought, hang on, now that's a wow factor that's got nothing at all to do with supermarket goods. It's an artificial wow factor that brings people back and forth into Woolworths without actually having anything to do with Kellogg's cornflakes or bottles of milk or Coca-Cola. And then we got involved in doing a lot of scratch games at Woolworths, where when you purchase something, you get a ticket, and when you scratch it out, you might get a red $1,000 note.
Yeah,
you had to get the blue and the green one to win $1,000. And all of this taught me a lesson about artificially driving traffic to businesses on a repetitive trade basis without ever mentioning price.
Right.
So that's where I caught this bug called the wow factor.
It's interesting you should say that, because it's often, I think, a concept that a lot of small businesses out there kind of almost neglect or forget, is the importance of repetitious trade, or the repetition of trade.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of time we spend so much money getting someone into our business, we have one transaction. It's almost like we then park them to the side and go after the next one.
Crazy thing is, Kerwin, and you'll find this very interesting, what I'm about to say, and if you don't, then try and look interested anyway, if you don't mind, because the interview just would not be good.
No.
Yeah, so just lean forward a bit.
I did my drama classes. So
You did good, okay. You know, can I ask you this question? You travel the world, and I bet you've been to a lot of restaurants. How many restaurants have ever asked you for your contact details before you leave?
There's maybe been, out of the many thousand, there's maybe been 3, 4.
So, there you go. I mean, it's just crazy, crazy stuff. The money that's being left on the table, not just by restaurants, but by all sorts of businesses because they don't collect data. You and I, because we're marketeers, have taught people how to have an opt-in box and give free reports and things like that online. But you know what? The offline world is yet to catch up, and it needs to, because the amount of money that's being left on the table. McDonald's collect no data. Bunnings collect no data, KFC collects no data, your local restaurants collect no data. The Rugby League had 82,000 people at the grand final. They have no clue who they were.
Wow.
Tic-a-tac do, but not the Rugby League.
I remember when an opt-in box was actually a giveaway form on a cash register once upon a time. That was the very first opt-in box that I ever created when I was in marketing, but it's funny you should say that.
Yeah.
Now, you've hinted towards the wow factor, which is obviously, you're known as the wow guy. So why don't you tell us a little bit, your business is actually called the Institute of Wow.
Yep.
So why don't you just give us a little bit of an highlight, update, breakdown of what the wow factor actually is?
Good, man. You know, I think for the most of the people who are watching this video fall under what I would call a challenger brand status. In other words, they're not the Coca-Cola of their industry. They're not the Apple of their industry. They're not the Disney of their industry. And if they're not, then they need to employ challenger brand tactics. And a great example of that is Richard Branson. Particularly here in Australia. When he came to Australia with his Virgin Airlines, he was not the leading brand, he was a challenger brand. And so all of his advertising was challenging Qantas. It was saying keep the airfare, and he was basically challenging the top dog. And well, of course, we
it's
know.
like a David and Goliath.
You got it, exactly, yep. David and Goliath. And a large part of my teachings is all about teaching people, business owners, how to be the David that beats Goliath. And the Greater Building Society was a classic example. They are a big business, a $5 billion business, but nowhere near the Commonwealth Bank or Westpac or any of the big banks. And they didn't realise they were a challenger brand. They were out there with a TV advertisement, and pretty much all of their marketing looked exactly the same as the banks.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if you've got 10 million and they've got 110 million, he with the biggest wallet will win if you're saying the same thing.
Exactly.
Because it's all about noise, and their share of voice is going to kill yours. So you've got to be different. You've got to be the mouse that roared. And so we taught them. I don't know why I said we. There's only one of me, but I taught them.
I've heard you've got multiple personalities.
Yes,
that could have something to do with it.
Yes, I do. I think I am schizophrenic, and so am I. Boom, boom. But anyway, yes, I got together with the grader and I said, look, you guys have to recognise that if you go down the same communications path as the big banks, you'll be invisible. They will just buy you out of town. So what we did is that we decided to think differently, and with the Greater Building Society, we created an artificial wow factor of a free holiday. And we said, look, for every home loan, if you get a home loan from the Building Society, you get a free holiday. Now, you know what that did? That actually took the eyes off the price. For 9 long years, the Greater Building Society just came on with all the marketing and said, get a home loan, get a free holiday, and depending upon the size of your home loan would depend upon where you would go. If you had a $300,000 home loan, you went to Fiji or Hawaii. If you had a $500,000 home loan, you went around the world.
Wow.
But the fact is that we just took the honeymoon rate away, which was 1% discount, because that used to be what they did, like all the banks did. And we just used that money and went to a travel wholesaler and got $2,000 holidays for $1,000. And we gave away free holidays. So it was cost neutral to the Building Society. But for 9 long years, they just came on TV, with or without Jerry Seinfeld, and said, get a home loan, get a free holiday. They quadrupled their home loans over the first couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah, now they couldn't do that every year after that, but in the first couple of years, in 3 months we doubled their home loans, in 12 months we tripled them, and within 2 years we quadrupled their home loans. So not once did they advertise an interest rate. Can you imagine having a business and never having to advertise a price?
That would be that. Like, that is ultimately the biggest competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question it begs to be asked. Seinfeld went into retirement, I think, with royalties in excess of $109 million is the number that I've heard bandied about. You know, he's only featured in ads for people like American Express and other very
Microsoft
and they are top tier Goliath brands. What was it that you did that got him out of retirement to come all the way to Australia to represent a David, as you would say?
Yeah, well, look, it certainly was a coup, and if I look back on my career up until now, it was probably the wow of all wows. There's no doubt about that.
That's got wow.
But how it came about is that a few years back when the GFC hit, the head of the Building Society, Don McGinn, said to me, look, JD, the free holiday thing, given that the banks are falling over around the world, maybe we might rest that for a little while, because it's sort of evaluated, we understand that, but with Lehman Brothers and what have you falling over, we'd like to rest that, and what we'd like to do is lift our brand. And because building societies and credit unions traditionally have working class demographics as their target audience, whereas if you wear a suit and tie, you tend to go to a bank. And I said to them, would you like to do that in a fast way or a slow way? And they knew that I didn't really like mild, I prefer wild. So therefore they said, fast way. And a mate of mine had done the Billy Connolly campaign for ING. And he told me exactly what that...
Again, another great campaign.
Fantastic campaign. And ING were hoping when they came to Australia after rebranding Mercantile Mutual that ING would be in the top 50 brands within the first 5 years. Courtesy of Billy Connolly, they were in the top 10 brands within 2 years.
Wow.
So it goes to show if you have the right personality, I'm not suggesting to everybody who's watching this to go out and get a celebrity endorsement, far from it. But if you do have the right one, then it's amazing how that can catapult your brand through the stratosphere, if it's done tastefully. So I said to the Greater Building Society, why don't we look at something like that? And to cut a long story short, we did a lot of research and asked both members and non-members who was a personality anywhere in the world that basically replicated the greatest personality. And the greatest personality, courtesy of the sort of demeanour that I had created for them, was very Virgin-esque. So it was very cheeky. It was always having a go at the bank, saying, they're ripping you off and they're not looking after you from a service point of view. And it was always done with a tongue-in-cheek. So when we put the survey out, Jerry Seinfeld came back number one.
Really?
And said, look, this is the guy that really would be a great fit for the Greater. Now, of course, I laughed and said,
good luck.
Could we not find Rove or Bert Newton or someone? And so this was a hell of a challenge. And mate, look, I won't bore you with the details, but for around about 9 months, our letters got returned. Whenever we sent a DHL packet over with all the gumph about the Building Society, we could not get near him. He's harder to get to than the Pope. And so much so that in America he can't fly on any regular plane. If you book Jerry Seinfeld, you have to give him a Learjet because he can't get on a normal plane. So anyway, I had enough after 9 months, and I thought, I'll go through his manager. So I found George Shapiro, his 75-year-old's manager, office in Beverly Hills. And I waited till midnight one night, and I found out that he had voicemail. And when you rang up, they would say, hello, this is Shapiro West, and if you'd like to leave a message for George, press 1. So I pressed 1. And I put on my best Australian accent that you could probably ever... I said, g'day, mate, copper digger, blue mate sport. It's JD from Australia. And I've just sent you an email, mate. And listen, I know it's the middle of the night at the moment there, but listen, we've got this great idea. It's a Bonza idea, actually. It's bigger than Budgie Boy. And it went on.
Seriously, that's it?
Yes. Yeah, it was ridiculous. Well, I just thought I had to use some wow. I had to be different. And you wouldn't believe it. I happened to be visiting the Greater Building Society 2 days later. They're in Newcastle head office, and I live on the Gold Coast, so I used to visit them once every fortnight. And I'm there, and the phone rings, and this lady on the other end of the phone with an American accent said, hello, John Dwyer, this is Amy Hyatt. I remember her name, Amy Hyatt. Amy Hyatt from George Shapiro's office. I've got George on the line. I went, yeah, okay, righto. And I'm looking around the office thinking, well...
Someone's taking a go.
Because they knew that I was pitching for Seinfeld, but they just thought I was an idiot and it's not going to happen. And I'm looking around, and he comes on, hey, John, there's George Shapiro. Now, this is an iconic manager in Hollywood. He looked after Rock Hudson and Gomer Pyle and Doris Day and Dick Van Dyke and all these big names. And now Jerry Seinfeld, and I'm treating him with disrespect because I just thought it was someone in the office. And I'm going, yeah, mate, good on you. And he goes, look, you've got your email, and I just thought I'd like to talk about the opportunity with Jerry. And I went, yeah, okay, well, I'll give you your best shot. And I'm looking around, who isn't it all? Their computer, something. No. And then he said to me, listen, I just want to ask you a question. I said, yeah, okay, sure. And he goes, the Greater Building Society. I went, yeah. He said, exactly what does it build? And I went, oh God, this is the real George. Because no one in the office would ask that. And I said, it doesn't build anything, it's a bank. He said, well, why did they call it the Greater Bank? I said, I don't know, I wasn't here in 1946. So anyway, you wouldn't believe it. I told him what had happened, and he laughed and laughed, because I said, look, I'm so sorry. You sounded like I was disrespectful, but I thought someone was taking the you-know-what. And he said, no, look, and we got on like a house on fire. It just shows the relationship building.
Yeah.
And by the end of the half an hour conversation, because he was telling me all about his life, and he said, leave it with me. I've got your email, I'll give it to Jerry, and I reckon this looks like good fun. So all you want Jerry to do is take the mickey out of the banks. I said, that's right. And 3 days later, we got an email from George, says, hi JD, spoke to Jerry, thinks it's good fun. Get over here in New York and we'll wrap it up.
Wow. Wow.
Isn't it silly?
That's iconic.
It's silly. So the lesson I learned out of that, though, is aside from being a bit cheeky, is never, ever, ever give up. Because had we decided, oh, look, he's too hard to get to, we'll move on to someone else, then I would have never got it, but we just hung in there.
Persistence pays. Yeah, absolutely.
Persistence beats intelligence. I read that on the bottom of one of those little calendars one day. Thank God.
I'm in the same boat. What have been some of the 3 biggest things that you've learned, as a marketer when it comes to marketing a business?
Okay, number 1, be the un of your industry. Okay, be the un of your industry. And if you're a butcher, be an un-butcher. If you are a plumber, be an un-plumber. And I know that's cutesy. We all, in the marketing game, try and come up with our own little sort of taglines, and mine is the Institute of Wow, and in fact, really, it's another word for unique selling point. Okay. Yeah. And I know that, happens to be my little thing that I throw out there, but I just think it's an easy one for business owners to remember. Be the un of your industry. So the Greater Building Society giving away free holidays, that's certainly the un of the banking industry. No other bank would do that. McDonald's for a long while giving away Happy Meal toys. That was the un of the hamburger industry. Now, others have copied them, but the fact is that you need to be the un of your industry. And in fact, one of my clients is a real estate agent, and I can't take credit for this. They had this name before they came onto my system. They're in Coffs Harbour. They're a real estate agency called Unreal Estate. So they've got it. And so number 1, be very different, be the un of your industry. Number 2, if you're good at what you do, then promote yourself as the expert. And I'm not the only marketing person that would advocate that. But you know what? Not many people do it. If you are the Steve Irwin of your industry, then make sure that you let people know that. Now, I'm not an advocate for you making it up. If you aren't the best plumber, then certainly don't say that you've got expertise when you don't. Because you wouldn't want your heart surgeon to do that. But yeah, promote yourself as an expert, because you'll find people gravitate to you regardless of how savvy you are with marketing. We all gravitate to Steve Irwin, we gravitate to the master chefs, we gravitate to Don Burke. And lastly, there's a whole bunch of them, but thirdly, you've got to make sure that you collect data.
Right.
And just as I touched on, I think with you previously, Kerwin, is there's so many people out there, both online and offline, not collecting the details of their audience.
Yeah.
Have to build your list.
Okay, fantastic. So you've been in marketing now how long?
71 years.
71 years. So you literally are the grandfather of marketing in Australia.
71 years, yeah. And I only got into it when I was 50, so yeah. No, I've been at probably about 30 years.
30 years.
Yep.
So, I'm slightly embarrassed. I'm very gullible. I actually almost believed you then.
Which would mean that I'd have to be 92. So that is an insult. I think I better go now. Yeah.
No, let's not point out Kerwin's math ability to calculate maths very quickly. Lumosity has a lot to answer for. So in that time, like 30 odd years, that's a long time. What are the 3 biggest mistakes that you've learned? Or not that you've learned, 3 biggest mistakes you've made?
Number 1, thinking that big is better. In other words, these days I do a lot of seminars, and in the beginning I got quite excited if there were 250 or 300 people in the room. But if they're not the right people, that is